It was a hot day in 1933. A British man named Maurice Wilson was watching his small, open-air aircraft's fuel tank being destroyed with a strong stick. He had just learned to fly an aircraft 2 months ago, but his biggest problem was not the end of fuel at thousands of feet, but a long list of problems, in which there were some British officers who he had left in Bahrain. Belief in being arrested upon landing in Iran, waves of the Persian Gulf below, and the increasing possibility that he will not be able to reach a safe place before the fuel runs out. But despite all this, Wilson kept moving forward, because the mission he was on was much bigger than these small problems, and his mission was to crash his aircraft on Mount Everest, the highest mountain in the world. Welcome to my documentary videos once again. Viewer Maurice Wilson was born on 21st April 1898 in West Yorkshire to a middle-class textile mill owner. If the Great War hadn't started for Maurice at the age of 16, then perhaps he would have joined his family textile business. But instead, he joined the British Army on his 18th birthday. He was eager to go to the battlefield as soon as possible. Finally, in November 1917, Wilson was sent to France, where the Germans were attacking the British Army. By 7 a.m., the Germans surrounded 3 of Wilson's battalion's 4 companies. But Wilson, who was still in the remaining D Company, kept firing blindly at the Germans from the machine gun post. Wilson was very stubborn, such a stubbornness that could have killed anyone. But he escaped this battle without any injury. The last soldier of his company who was not injured, he was awarded the Military Cross for his bravery. Because of him, the Germans' attack was stopped. But a few months after receiving this award, Wilson was sent back to the front line in June. On 19 July 1918, Wilson was moving forward with a small team when a German machine gunner saw him and started firing. Wilson was shot in the back and left arm, but he survived. This wound became a cause of pain and weakness in his arm, which followed him all his life. For the next few months, Wilson was admitted to the hospital due to his injuries. After that, he was sent to a reserve battalion, but maybe he was destined for trouble. As soon as he reached here, he had influenza, which was spreading rapidly all over the world at that time. This disease took him back to the hospital bed, and the World War I lying on the bed was over. During the treatment, Wilson wrote a letter to the War Ministry in which he requested a pension for his injuries. But the ministry rejected this request, because according to the military doctors, his injuries were not so serious that he should be given money. Wilson was very saddened by this refusal, and for this reason there was a rebellion against the government system in his heart. This hatred remained with him until he was demobilized in 1919 and sent back home to Bradford. The same question was in front of Wilson, which was in front of thousands of other soldiers of World War I. That we made so many sacrifices, got hurt, but did not get a good revenge. Wilson was now broken from the inside, and he wanted to do something big in his life. He wandered around the world for the next 10 years. During this time, he got married twice, changed many businesses, but until 1932, he did not find the peace he was looking for. On top of that, the wounds of the war were still hurting him. His health was deteriorating day by day. During this time, Wilson met a Baba who said that if he stayed hungry for a few days, all his problems would be solved. Wilson really fasted for a few weeks and spent time in prayers. After a few months, he came back to society, completely healthy, not only his depression, but also completely free from the disease. Now his faith became even stronger that any problem in the world can be solved by fasting and praying. Now Wilson started taking new challenges. He claimed that he would do something to the world with the power of his fast, something that no one has ever been able to do before. During this time, one day he saw an article in the newspaper. It was about the British Mount Everest expedition in 1924. In this mission, George Mallory and Andrew Irwin tried to reach the peak of Mount Everest, the highest mountain in the world. But on the way, both got lost somewhere. Wilson had now found a purpose. He decided to climb Mount Everest. That too alone, with the help of his fasts and prayers. But the problem was how to climb Mount Everest. Wilson knew that to go to Everest, a lot of money is spent in the mission. You have to take different gears, and all this money is spent by sponsors. And most of all, you have to do a lot of training. But he was looking for a shortcut by bypassing all these requirements. In 1932, an Everest mission was emerging in the headlines under the name of Houston Expedition. In this mission, a ship will go to Mount Everest for the first time, and its photos will be taken from there. Remember that no one had ever climbed Mount Everest until then. At that time, the world was very anxious to see the peak of this mountain. Here, a crazy idea was born in Wilson's mind. He thought that he would take part in this expedition, and when the ship would be above Everest, he would jump there by parachute. And thus, he would become the first person in the world to reach the peak of Everest. A few weeks later, he rejected this idea, considering it impossible. But for such an idea, which was even more dangerous. Yes, Wilson was completely crazy. He made a plan that he would buy his own ship and crash-land it on Mount Everest at a height of 15,000 feet in the snow. More than half of the way would be covered by him, and the other half would be covered by him alone with the help of fasting and prayers. Here, it is important to understand that Maurice Wilson had neither the experience of mountaineering nor flying. He did a little practice of climbing the mountain, but did not try to learn anything about technical mountaineering. After that, he bought a 3-year-old heavy-land Gipsy death ship, which was previously part of a flying circus. This is a 2-seater open-cabin biplane made of wood. It was very famous in recreational aero clubs at that time. He wrote Everest on the side of the ship, a name he had made himself, which was probably similar to Mount Everest. During the pilot's training, his instructor clearly told him that you will never be able to reach India. But Wilson insisted. During this time, the British Air Ministry found out about his mission, and they did not want Wilson to do any such madness. When the British Air Ministry told the Nepalese authorities about Wilson's plan, they refused to allow him to enter the Nepalese airspace. This was bad news because Wilson had planned to reach Everest on the way to Nepal. But he could go to any extent to fulfill his desire. He called the media at the Staglin Aerodrome airfield in London and tore the telegram of the British Air Ministry in front of everyone and took off without caring for any permission. Everest, which was filled with extra fuel drums, could travel up to 750 miles. Wilson made refueling stops in Freiburg, France, Marseille, Italy, Pisa, Nepal, and Sicily. It was a beautiful and almost peaceful journey. But after crossing the Mediterranean, difficulties began. In Tunisia, the police arrested him, but he was released soon. In addition, in Tunisia, he accidentally filled the fuel tank of the ship with water-soluble fuel. But he was lucky to land safely in the city of Gabes, Tunisia. There he refilled the fuel properly and left for Egypt from the cities of Tripoli, Benghazi, Tobruk, and Alexandria. When he reached Cairo, he got bad news. Waiting for him in Cairo was not found anywhere. He spent the whole day wandering around with different British officers, but perhaps the British deliberately stopped his permit. Instead of wasting more time on bureaucracy, Wilson flew straight to Baghdad. Now Iran was in front of him, but he was not allowed to land there. That's why he had to find a new way. But the problem was that he did not have a good detailed map. He landed in Baghdad and bought a school atlas from the market and marked his way on it, and left for Bahrain. During this time, the British officers started thinking one step ahead of Wilson. They already sent a telegram to the next location. When Wilson reached Bahrain, a British officer called him to his office. The officer explained to him directly that there is no airstrip ahead for your small plane. There is only one place in Iran, and you will be arrested as soon as you land there without a permit. The officer told Wilson that he could refuel his plane in Bahrain, but only on the condition that he would go straight back to London from here. Wilson agreed to this. But when he took off, instead of turning towards London, he took the opposite direction, east towards India. He passed through the southern edge of the Persian Gulf and left Iran. He secretly saw a new strip near Iran on the map of the British officer in Bahrain, and it was in Gwadar, which used to be part of India. After 9.5 hours, when his fuel gauge came close to zero, Wilson landed safely on the Gwadar airstrip. Wilson continued his journey to British India, where a new wave of the press was waiting for him. He traveled all over India celebrating his victory, and finally reached the new city of northeast India, which is very close to the border of Nepal. But the long arms of the British government reached him again. The local police were waiting for him on the Purnia airstrip. They captured Everest and appointed a security guard on Wilson. The British government reminded him again that despite being a plane, Wilson has no permission to fly over Nepal. Wilson was now badly trapped. He could not even fly his own plane because it had been seized. Now he was trapped between the British government and the decreasing amount of money. Finally, in July 1933, he was forced to sell Everest. His plan to crash-land the plane on Mount Everest was completely ruined, but he still insisted on climbing Everest. He spent the winter season in Darjeeling, India, kept fasting, prayed, and tried to get a permit to enter Tibet, so that he could climb Mount Everest from the side of Tibet and fulfill his dream. But all his efforts were in vain. Finally, he secretly started planning to climb Mount Everest, 1324. On March 21st, 1934, Wilson begins a walk in the guise of a Buddhist monk and crosses Sikkim to reach Tibet. After a few attempts, he returned from the base camp of Mount Everest. Because of lack of breath and lack of training, his health was deteriorating. On May 2nd, 1934, Wilson set out again for Everest, but this time with two companions. These two companions were experienced, so this time they reached Camp 3 in just 3 days. Wilson left his companions at Camp 3 and started moving forward alone. His companions told him not to go any further, but he did not listen to anyone. It was the same stubbornness that could have killed anyone. Wilson gave his companions one last warning that if he did not return for 2 weeks, then consider that he was dead. But they did not wait 2 weeks, but waited a whole month. When Wilson did not return to Camp 3, they left Everest and descended. In the last days of July, they reached India and reported Wilson's death. Finally, another British mountaineer had become a victim of Everest's terrifying world. 1 year after this incident, in 1935, Eric Shipton's Everest expedition found Wilson's body. He was lying between Mount Everest and Changsi under a pass called North Col, between his backpack, diary, and torn tent. His diary's last entry was on May 31st, 1934, in which it was written, "I am leaving again. What a beautiful day." I hope you will like and share this video. Thank you very much for watching. See you in the next great video.